In this video, we're going to walk through several different possible tech sales career paths. What we're looking at on the screen right now is the compensation guide that gets published every year by Betts Recruiting. Betts Recruiting is one of, if not my favorite, recruiting firm in the tech sales space. I'm pretty sure they do stuff other than tech sales specifically. I think they've branched out into marketing and customer success and some other departments, but they really excel in tech sales. So if you're a company that is looking for a recruiting firm, or even if you're a candidate looking to work with a recruiter, Betts Recruiting is great. This compensation guide is the resource I chose to walk through a tech sales career path, because you also get some context on how much money you can be making for each of these roles. And Betts is definitely a source. They fill hundreds of these tech sales roles, if not thousands. So they definitely have good data on what the compensation is. So that'll give us some monetary context as we talk about the career paths that are available in tech sales. So starting at the top, what we're looking at first, it's SDRs, sales ops, and sales engineering. And sales engineering. This is a little confusing at first because sales ops and sales engineer are kind of like branches off of tech sales that aren't like the main closing business sales path that I think most people have in mind when they think of tech sales, but we'll still talk about them as options. But first, let's start with SDR recent grad. So if you don't know already, SDR stands for Sales Development Representative. Two other roles that are very similar to SDR, and I think companies use them interchangeably sometimes, are BDR and ADR. BDR stands for Business Development Representative, and ADR stands for Account Development Representative. If you are just getting started in tech sales, those are the three job titles I would recommend typing into search engines: SDR, BDR, and ADR. SDR is the most popular. That's why it's the only one you see listed here. You can probably assume that the compensation is going to be mostly the same across SDR, BDR, ADR. And in terms of comp for an SDR that either is just graduating from college, or maybe you're switching from another career and you're still relatively inexperienced, in San Francisco at least, which is probably going to have the highest pay out of all of these, your base salary, you're looking anywhere from $50,000 to $65,000. And then OTE, you're looking anywhere from $75,000 to $90,000. If you don't know already what OTE is, we have another video about this. You can go check it out. But real quick, it's just your base salary plus your on-target commission. So it's basically like your total cash compensation in a sales role. Let me scroll down a bit. So you can see that the positions in these two tables are the same. The only thing that's different is it's just showing you the salaries for different locations. So we got San Francisco, LA, and Chicago on top, and then we've got New York, Austin, and then any remote role, presumably in the US, on the bottom. So after you have been an SDR, like your first tech sales role, really conveniently, Betts also specifically shows the compensation for SDRs that have 6 months or more of experience. And why I think they do this is because there actually is a pretty drastic increase in your earning potential after you've been an SDR for just 6 months. And as somebody who has hired for tech sales positions, I've seen this firsthand. It is so much better for a company to get an SDR with some experience versus an SDR who's brand new. Because if an SDR is brand new, like realistically, it takes about like 2 months or more to train an SDR before they can really be very productive at all, unless they just have great natural skills and they come in just being excellent somehow. So once you have 6 months of experience as an SDR, you really are way more valuable to the market, which is why I tell people, like, don't worry too much about your first role. Just like get an offer, especially if you're struggling to get an offer. Just like get an offer, get in the door, get your training, do your first 6 months. It's going to be hard. You're going to do a lot of cold calling, but if you can do your first 6 months and make it, your next job, you're going to get a jump in pay. Especially if you've been performing, that's like almost I don't want to say guaranteed, but the data is showing that you get a jump in pay. And you can see, so for example, let's just use San Francisco as an example. If you're a recent grad, you're talking about 75 to 90 OTE, and then once you've had 6 months of experience, you already could get potentially a 10K bump, a 5 to 10K bump from your OTE. Then will be 80K to 100K. So you could potentially already be bumping into that 6-figure territory if you're a top performing SDR after just like 6 to 7 months in your career, which is why people always talk about, you can make 6 figures in tech sales. And then, so from there, SDR Manager is what's listed on the table here. And that's interesting because SDR Manager is an option. And this is where we see the career paths start to branch out. So if you're a really good SDR, you can go on to the management track, which means you'll be managing a team of SDRs. And a lot of really good SDRs do that. It's a great path. You can see your jump in compensation is going to be huge. You'll almost double your compensation, or you will double your compensation if you can go from being an SDR and doing really well to being a manager. But then what you need to be aware of is that you're kind of setting yourself up for the management path. So after you're an SDR manager, maybe you'll go on to be an AE manager. Maybe you'll go on to be like a head of sales or a VP of sales. So if you want to lead and you want to be a manager, going that SDR manager route might make a lot of sense. Let's talk really quickly about sales operations and sales engineer. We won't talk about this too much. So sales engineer, another term for this is solutions engineer. This is the most technical tech sales role. So if you are graduating with a degree in computer science, or you know how to code, or you have experience in software development, sales engineer or solutions engineer is definitely a role you should consider. This is a very high paid role. This is like one of the most important jobs in the tech industry, in my opinion, because you combine the communication skills of being in sales and the technical skills of being an engineer. And these are usually, the sales engineers are the between salespeople and usually the engineers at the client company and the engineers at your own company. They're kind of the communicator. They translate the technical terms. So you can start out as a sales engineer. I think Verkada is a company that's hiring a lot for solutions engineers right now. You'd have to check me on that. Or you can start in sales and become a sales engineer. I've even seen people start as software engineers and become sales engineers. So that's an option as well. And then sales operations. So there's a lot of operations involved with sales, setting up a CRM, setting up, lead generation. There's a lot of things to set up and maintain so that the sales team can do what they do. And that's what sales ops does. So if you get into sales and you realize you really like the operational aspects and you don't like the talking to people aspects as much, sales ops is an option. But again, those are kind of like branches out from what I would call the typical tech sales career path. So scrolling down here's where we see kind of the next stage of your tech sales career after you've gotten beyond the SDR or the entry level years. One of the most typical kind of promotion paths you'll see in tech sales is from SDR to AE. And what an AE is, if you don't know, it stands for account executive, which you can see on the screen. These are the folks who are actually closing the business. They're actually doing the pitches and demos and closing the deals, getting the contracts signed. And SDRs are, I didn't explain this before, but SDRs are setting up AEs with those leads. So if you've been an SDR for a while, you've been cold calling, you've been generating leads, and you've been passing those leads to account executives for them to close. A lot of times SDRs will get the opportunity to be promoted to account executive. So they will go from setting up the appointments to actually taking the appointments and closing the business themselves. And as you can see with the compensation, with this comes a huge increase in compensation. I would actually say AE is probably the most typical tech sales role. When you think of like a tech salesperson, like an AE is probably who you have in mind. Somebody who is on the phone, on video, shaking hands, closing deals, going to conferences. This is an account executive. One thing to note is that your commission will become a bigger part of your compensation when you become an AE. As an SDR, a typical split is like anywhere from like 60-40 base to commission or 70-30. When you become an AE, it's usually 50-50. And you actually see that represented here. So 75 is half of 150, 110 is half of 220, 90 is half of 180, 125 is half of 250. So for example, if you've been an AE for 3 to 5 years, the top level of your base salary could be 125K, and then the top level of your on-site earnings could be 250K, and that's in San Francisco. And then you can see Bets does an awesome thing. Again, the 0 to 3 means 0 to 3 years of experience, and 3 to 5 means 3 to 5 years of experience. Here, let me see if I can use a marker here. Yeah, there we go. That's much better. Okay, so yeah, so what I was talking about is the 0 to 3 years of experience and 3 to 5 years of experience. And you can see that there is an increase in compensation as you go up in experience. This can be because some companies have like internal, like AE1, AE2, AE3. Bigger companies usually have that. Or it could just be because you're closing bigger deals. Or you're even just getting better. Because commission is a big part of your compensation. So if you're getting better and closing more deals, then your compensation is going to go up. After being an account executive for a while, you might have the opportunity to be promoted to an account executive that handles larger accounts. So something I didn't talk about before is that account sizes in tech sales are typically small to medium business, SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. And so maybe when you first start out as an AE, you're selling more to SMB and mid-market, but then enterprise, these are contracts that it ranges, but you're getting into the 5, 6, 7-figure contracts, the bigger deals. And then of course your commission is going to be a lot higher, which is why enterprise AEs normally require 5 to 10 years experience to be hired. Usually you need to have been selling in tech sales for a while. But then with that obviously comes, a big jump in pay. This is where you hear about enterprise AEs making $500,000, $1 million a year. There are some enterprise AEs that really make that much because they are closing big tech deals. But they usually only get there after they've been selling for a while successfully. And so now the next role, sales manager and director of sales. So let's think back to what we talked about before in terms of going from SDR to SDR manager. I explained how you kind of make the decision to go into management at that point. Whereas if you're a good SDR and you don't decide to be an SDR manager and you decide to be an AE, what you're deciding then is to remain as what is called an individual contributor. You'll see it, the acronym IC sometimes, IC in tech sales. So if you don't want to be in management and you want to be an individual contributor, that just means you're continuing to sell. You're the one on the video, on the phones, shaking the hands, closing the deal. You actually like the sales. You like the hunt. And so if that's what you like, if you actually like talking to clients and closing the deals, then a career path for you is probably going to be SDR, AE, enterprise AE, and then from there you just go to bigger and bigger and bigger deals. There's even really top level AE roles. It's called like strategic or key accounts, and these are AEs that close like $1 million deals. So if you really like just to sell, then that's a career path that you can totally build a very lucrative life on. You can get to millions of dollars in compensation, not even including your equity at these companies, just from being a salesperson. But if you go the management route, let's say you become an SDR manager, and then maybe after that you become either a sales manager, which usually refers to like a manager of AEs, or a director of sales. Now you're getting into like the ladder of sales leadership. So at smaller companies, sometimes it's called the head of sales. At bigger companies, usually it's sales manager, then director of sales. And then after that, sometimes there's a head of sales layer, sometimes there's a VP of sales layers. Different companies do it differently. But the idea is that you're essentially just climbing the corporate management ladder in the sales department. So when you're a director of sales, you have a team of sales managers below you. When you're a VP of sales, that might mean you have a team of directors of sales, and you can kind of see how the branch works out until you get to the very top, which is usually like the CRO or sometimes the CEO, which brings up this last section here. So if you really make it in tech sales, and at this point, we're probably talking about you having been in tech sales for like 10 or 20 years, CRO stands for Chief Revenue Officer. This is just like kind of the C-level exec that's in charge of usually almost always sales, but also probably customer success and some other kind of revenue generating departments. And then sometimes they're just called VP of sales. Maybe the company doesn't have a CRO. Sometimes it's called Senior VP of sales. And you can see that your compensation can get, up to $500,000 in this role. And it can go much higher than that. And again, this doesn't include equity, which usually becomes a very big part of your compensation as you get more advanced in your career. So hopefully that was helpful. I'll scroll back up to the top real quick just to do a really brief overview. So, you'll start out in tech sales as an SDR, BDR, or ADR. After you have some success being an individual contributor, you can choose between, becoming a manager or becoming an AE and continuing to sell. Sales operations and sales engineer are two of the most common kind of offshoot roles to kind of do something different in the tech sales world. Some people also go into account management and customer success, which is handling or helping customers after the sale, after the deal has already been closed. And then after you've been an SDR, you can become an account executive and eventually an enterprise account executive, close bigger and bigger deals. Or if you want to go down the management path, then it's sales manager, director of sales, sometimes head of sales, VP of sales, CRO, and the compensation will increase all the time. So hopefully that was helpful. I will put the link to this compensation guide in the description of the video. This one is a bit outdated. I actually think this one is the 2022 version. I think they have released the 2023 version. You should be able to find that pretty easily on the Bets website. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe to our channel. What we make videos about is just getting a job in tech sales. That's it. So if you want to get into tech sales, or maybe you're early in your career in tech sales and you want to learn more about tech sales, definitely subscribe to our channel. If you're not interested in tech sales, I would be very surprised if you've watched the video this long. But don't subscribe if you don't care about tech sales, because that is all we talk about. So thanks so much for hanging out and watching, and we'll see you later.